Welcome to Emedaj Fashion's in-depth training. In today's video, we will be learning how to make a knife pleated circle skirt. And this is the fabric I'll be using. If you are a beginner, you will be needing your tape measure, pair of scissors, your set of rules, chalk, and tacking pins. Let's start by unfolding the fabric. In this video, we will be creating two different patterns. That is the front and the back view, which is from the waist to the hip, and also the circle, which is from the hip to the skirt length. We will be starting with the front view pattern creating, and we will be using the the hip measurements in creating this pattern. So as you can see, I'm using hip 37.5. So whatever measurements you are using for the hip, you divide it into 4. So after dividing it into 4, that is what I had. Then you mark. So that is going to be your first mark. That is the hip measurement. Then after, you create a sewing allowance, which is for any future expansion. Then in this skirt, we'll be creating a dart. So I'll be adding 1.5. I'll be using 1.5 in creating the dart. So after, you join all the measurements together, and then you create your front view. I'll be using from my waist to the hip, I'll be using 7 inches. Then I'm going to add an additional 1 inch. That is ½ inch stitch at the waist and ½ inch stitch at the hip. So 7 plus 1 is going to give me 8 inches. And that is what I'm going to use in creating the waist to the hip pattern. With the back view, all you have to do is just create your zipper allowance. So you need not start all over again with your measurement. Just add your zipper allowance to the measurement you had with the front view, and then use that in creating the back view. Let's proceed to the circle pattern, and since we will be creating pleats, we will need to create a wider circle. For us to get the circle length, you deduct the waist to the hip from the full skirt length, then add an additional 1 inch and also ½ inch for stitching at the hip. So we're going to join the circle to the hip, and we will be making a ½ inch stitch. So don't forget to add it to it. So for us to get the full skirt length, waist to hip minus, or the full skirt length minus the waist to hip, add an additional 1 inch, then an additional ½ inch. So we will keep shifting the 7 inches, and what we get is going to be the skirt length. So we've created 3 marks, and this is the 7. We're going to shift the 7 to the second mark. Then after, we shift it to the 3rd mark. So what we get there is going to be our skirt length, or the circle length. So we're going to start creating our circle at the 3rd mark. So you see we had 14 inches. So you start creating the circle. Go ahead and duplicate the front and back view. You can either use a plain fabric or use the same fabric. So in this video, I decided in using the same fabric in duplicating. So one side is going to serve as the inner and the other side is going to serve as the outer. Let's start creating the darts, but first let's create the zipper allowance. In this video, I'm going to show you the simplest way in calculating your darts, and after watching, you're no longer going to have issue with dart calculating. I'll be using waist 29 and I'll be dividing my 29 into 8 equal parts. You can either use this method until you get to the 8th measurement or the 8th division, but I'll be giving you a very simple method. You see, on the tape measure, every mark counts. So every mark on the tape measure represents something. So this is what you do. We start by counting every mark on the tape measure until we get to the 29 or whatever waist measurement you'll be using. So you see, on my tape measure, I have 2 marks hidden within the metal, and we have the 3rd one exposing. So you start by counting with the 2, which is the hidden one, then you move on to the 3rd and make sure to count every mark until you reach whatever waist measurement you are using. I'm using waist 29. So in dividing it into 8 equal parts, or with the counting of my marks, 29 is going to give me 3. So this is where my 29 is going to be, and that is what I'll be using, or you'll be using, in creating your dart. So let's proceed. So you mark, then after, remember we added 1.5 inch for the dart. So you mark your 1.5 inch. Then after, you divide the 1.5 inch mark into 2 equal parts. You're going to get 3/4. So between the 2 marks, you mark your 3/4. Then we're going to extend the middle line a little bit downwards, depending on how you want it, but I'm going to use 3.5 or 3.5. Then we extend the middle measurement, then create an angle within the line we created. So with the middle measurement, whatever measurement you get there, you extend it down. And create an angle. So we're going to join the 3 lines together. So our dart is created. Always use this method when dividing or creating your dart. So after we are done with the dart creating, we are going to transfer it to the rest of the fabric, and we do that by using a tracer, but I'm going to use a different method. That is, I'm going to transfer my darts with the use of pins. Please follow the procedure carefully so that you do not make a mistake when transferring your darts. It is easy for you to add an additional measurement, so please follow the procedure carefully. So watch how I'm going to turn my pin. So my first transfer has been made. I'm going to move on to the waist. So this is the inner, and make sure you do not transfer it to the positive side of the fabric. It's going to be at the negative side only. Please, once again, follow the procedure carefully so that you do not get it wrong. So the dart transfer is done. All you have to do now is join your lines together and you are done with the darts. Divide the hip measurement into 4 and mark. Repeat the same procedure with the waist, and after join the 2 lines together. Tack your dart to dart with your pins. Create the folding according to your waist measurement.